Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Design Cuts live session. And we are here today with the wonderful and ridiculously talented Nathan Brown. How are you doing, Nathan?
I'm good. Very good. Excited to
Awesome.
be here. Yeah.
So,
cool.
okay, Nathan, what will you be showing us
Yes.
on today's session?
So we're going to walk through some using watercolor textures in Photoshop. And I'm going to be using the Master Watercolor brush set, which is now available for Photoshop.
Awesome. It's an awesome set. And if anyone hasn't seen this brush set's been out for quite a few years now, hasn't it? It's always pretty cutting edge, but this year there was a big update to it. A load of new stuff went in there. A load of beautiful new previews as well to show off its capabilities. So do go and check out the page because there are some beautiful previews there as well. And the dog on the cover is particularly awesome, I think.
Well, thank you very much.
So cool. Nathan, whenever you're good to go.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to start. I'm going to show you just kind of what the Master Watercolor brush
Photoshop
set.
1. My goodness.
What?
Yeah. What? Chris used Photoshop 1. I can't even remember.
Winner.
My memory's just not that good. CS2. Yeah.
Photoshop 1.
I think mine was about 3 as well. Lindsay's saying hers was 3. I think we're similar.
3. There we go. Oh, 1994. I was 3. Yeah, nice. Okay, so when you install the Master Watercolor brush set in Photoshop, you have these 3 sets, right? You've got brushes, you've got washes, and you've got splatters, right? And then they are broken up into subfolders in categories and subfolders. So the brush set contains everything that you would use to like paint and render. There's a few special effects and some smudge tools in there. Like, for example, these textured round brushes. These are all like small round brushes, things that you would use to render, to shade, to paint. And then there's a variety of them because they all have a little bit of a different edge, a little bit of a different way they behave with pressure, and a little bit of a different texture. So there's a huge variety so that you can create all sorts of different looks and feels when you're painting. Okay, so there's also, just to point out too, there's also some texture brushes. There's wet textures, there's stains and washes, there's mixer brushes, which are all intended for painting like washes and really heavily textured areas that we're going to be looking at today. So you can use those to paint custom washes and textures. Then there is also the washes set, which is a collection of wash stamps, right? I'm going to show you what one of those looks like real quick.
Well, and Sheila asked a question as well. She said, where can she get the Photoshop version of the brushes if she's already got it? Well, the great news is that if you bought it at Design Cuts, as it's Design Cuts original update, all you have to do is go to your account and just download the files again for the product, and they will all be there.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So these wash stamps, you're able to just place down a stamp that was created from a real watercolor wash versus painting one from scratch. So it's a really quick way, and it gives you a super variety of different ways to paint these washes. And then, of course, you can layer them and build them up and just create like these really rich watercolor textures. And then there is a set of splatters as well, and it's broken up into categories. So there are wet splatters and splatter painters. Some of these are stamps, like what we saw before. And then some of them allow you to paint splatters. It gives you a variety of ways to paint and layer splatters and create some really cool textures that we're going to talk about.
Cool.
So grab my mouse. All right. So now that's the set, right? And it also includes some textures, some texture files that we'll look at too in just a bit. But that's the main 3 brush sets that are included.
Awesome. And I know you spend a huge amount of time making these as authentic as possible, and
they're all made from real watercolor, high quality watercolor paper, professional paints, and to get real nice contrast and real good quality source materials for this brush set.
You are often covered in paint.
Often, yes, and two, it's also not only is it made from quality source materials, but it's also been in development for years. Like the Procreate version, I mean, I created it and then have updated it many times and refined it as I used it in my own work. I didn't just create the brush set and then launch it and never touch it again. I used it in my own work and refined it, and there's been several updates. And then this latest, the newest version, the Photoshop version and Affinity version, are based off of the current version for Procreate.
Cool. And I bet a lot of this, a lot of ideas came out when you were doing the master watercolor class as well, which took what, like 8 months?
Oh, for sure.
To do that course?
Yes,
like that?
Yes, it took.
Yeah.
It took a while, yes. But so much fun fun to create that. And I learned so much from doing that. We were talking about it earlier, just how much, when you have to think about your process and then put it into like, define it and put it into words to convey it to somebody else. It's like, it also teaches you a lot about what it is you're doing. So it was really incredible to put that course together and really define what it is that I'm doing and what it is I'm looking for and while I'm painting. So when we're talking about textures for watercolor, I'm going to show you, we're going to start out, what we're going to do is we're going to start out like, what is a watercolor, what I consider to be a watercolor texture or a wash texture, and how do you use them? How do you incorporate them? And we're going to look at a really simple example, and I'm going to walk through the process in a really simple example before we look at a more complex example. Because what I was worried about is if I show you this painting that's got all these layers and all this complexity, the process itself might get lost, right? So I wanted to start out really simple and just walk through the process really like just a real simple viewpoint. And then when we go to look at a more complex painting, you'll be able to see what I'm doing based on our simple example, which is a bird, a very simple bird. So, okay, these 3 sets here come with the master watercolor brush set. What you have are the brushes, which would be used for painting, for rendering. There's a set in here for painting washes and textures, these wet texture brushes, the stains, the mixer brushes, the special effects. There's a set for the smudge tool. There's a set for creating watercolor papers if you want to paint paper texture in just certain areas. We have another collection is the washes, which is also divided into subcategories. And these are stamps, right? So these can be layered and built up stamps. You can build these up and create these washes and textures. And it's just like a click to stamp. Okay. So there is also the splatter set, which is broken up into categories. And I was showing these earlier that some of these are stamps like this, and then some of them you can paint textures with those. Okay. Does that bring us up to speed? I think that's what I covered, just how the set was broken up into categories and subcategories. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah.
I think we're there. We're good.
Okay, cool.
Go.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So now we've got our simple bird example, and I'm going to kind of walk through what I mean by using and painting with textures. And again, we're going to start with this real simple example. It's not going to be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, but it's going to be the process step by step that I use to paint with textures. Now, before I get into adding some texture to this, I want you to understand what I mean by texture, watercolor texture versus like flat color. Okay, so get a brush to draw with. So, okay, so this is flat color, right? So what you have here is this flat color. Okay, there's no texture, there's no rendering. It's just this flat blue color, which is very, very digital, right? It has this really digital look to it. Okay. Now, if I show you a couple of real world examples here, these are actual watercolor on paper. Now, if you look, like here's yellow, right? But it's not that flat color like we just saw on the bird. There's like paper texture going on. There's little bits of darker yellow and kind of orange. This purple here has got like a couple of color variations. Like you can see, like if we move the picker around, can you see that? Yeah, you can see.
Yeah,
that.
Totally.
It's pulling all these different shades of purple. Like it's not just this one flat color. Okay. So this is also like, I will use washes like this in traditional painting because it's just a way to create a bit of abstract. Like I love how watercolor can have really sharp details and hard edges, but it can also have this real flowy, watery, abstract nature to it. And again, you can kind of see some things going on like up here in this area. There's like kind of these little like splatters that are happening. You can see them down here. And then again, we have, it's not just blue, it's all these different shades of blue and all this really cool paper texture. All right. So how do we do stuff like that with our bird example? Because this is just flat and looks very digital. So one thing that I will do, but actually before I do it though, I want to point out, I always keep in mind the focal point in a painting, right? So like in this particular painting, the focal point is that the head, okay, the beak and the eye of a bird. It's usually the focal point for a bird painting. So as I begin to add some abstract elements and textures and washes to this, I don't want to lose the features in here, these features here. I don't want to lose that because that's my focal point and I want the viewer to focus their attention there. So I always want to keep that in mind. Okay, so I want to talk about edge types as well. And as I start to add these, I go over this a lot in the course. You want a variety of edge types. You want to maintain some of your hard edges, especially in the focal point. And then you want to have some soft edges and maybe something somewhere in between. It's kind of like it's an edge that's still, it's still there, but it's maybe not as crisp. You know that it's there, like maybe in the wing of the bird, you can see that it's the wing. It's not completely lost, right? So especially in the focal point, you want to keep the hard edges because that's where the eye focuses, okay? So, all right, so now we want to start by just smudging and because I have my flat color here and I just want to smudge some of it and just kind of have some of this color bleed out a little bit. So I'm going to do that with one of the smudge brushes. I'm going to choose this random water smudger. And I do that. I'll show you why I do this in just a bit, but just trust the process. So, and I know that some of these areas, like I don't want to do it up here because I don't want to lose the bird's beak and eye because again, that's the focal point. I just want to take some of these edges and just kind of add a bit of softness in areas where I know it won't be a focal point. And you'll see why I do this in just a sec. It will make sense. Okay, it still looks nothing like watercolor, but it will in a sec. All right. Okay, so now I want to add some washes that are the same color or a similar color that I've used for my bird. Right, so I'm going to sample this blue color and I want to go and I'm going to choose a wash. Get one of these water washes. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one I pick because a lot of times I will drop one down and just see what it looks like and try another one. I'm going to put it on a layer underneath the bird. And just start to add in. I kind of move it around, until I find an area. I don't like that one, so I'll try another one. Try another one. Let's go with this. Okay, so I like that one. The reason I like it is because it looks like it's natural. Like it looks like paint flowing away from the bird. And when I say it looks natural, that just comes from my experience of working with real watercolor. Like to my eye, it looks like actual paint flowing away from the bird. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I just read a love comment from the lovely Nishreen who says, in my humble opinion, always good to learn from a digital painting from a pro who's supremely well versed with the analog painting techniques. You rock, Nathan.
Oh, so kind.
This is really lovely. Thank you.
That's so lovely. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just adding a bit of something like that, maybe. Or let me try another one. Sometimes I can do this for a very long time, which I'm not going to do because you would get very bored. Okay, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it right. I'm going to leave it right there. Okay. So what's going on here now? Let me get back to a pencil here. Let's see. Grab that. Okay, so what's going on is this paint now looks like it's flowing outside of the lines. And we created those smudges for that very reason, so that the paint looks like it's just kind of bleeding out towards the or to the edge of the paper. Now, a lot of times, now I will try to keep composition in mind, you know, so like if maybe like, for example, like if we were going to, our bird's kind of going this way. So if we were going to maybe say he's sitting on a branch or something like that. So we have this kind of a composition going on, like this X shape. I might add washes that kind of go like this or something like that, just to keep composition in mind. Okay. But we're not going to worry about that for our simple example. All right. So I'm going to add another layer. And I want to add like maybe some complementary colors. So a complementary to this blue might be like a yellow or orange color. So let's go with maybe like a light yellow or orange. And I want to go back to the washes again and just begin to add some of those. And when you layer colors like this, it really lends to the watercolor look, because things are starting to layer and colors are starting to blend, and you can smudge some of them together, and it really starts to create this watercolor texture, right? So another thing that I will do to sort of blend things would be to add. Now you can combine all the layers here, and you can use the eraser tool to do this, like the eraser tool with a wash brush. Or you can use white. And a lot of times I'll use white because I want to keep everything layered, and I want this white to affect everything below, right? So if I stamp with white, I'm essentially erasing all of the paint below back down to the paper. Okay, so what that looks like, let's grab another wash. Let's try this one. Oops, I need white. So I might come in and just erase back some of the detail. Let me try another one. And another thing I would do here is to take maybe one of these effect brushes, and a lot of times I will use salts or an alcohol type effect and just add a little bit of texture over the solid color, because again, I don't want that solid flat color. Okay, so you can see now we have all this texture, and we've kind of broken up that flat color. All right, so let me check my list here because I don't want to skip anything. Oh, okay, one more thing. Yeah, so all right, another thing that I will do in the process is to add back detail, right? So let me get a color, get this color that I used for the line work. And I'm gonna go back to like a detailer brush. I'm just gonna use the pencil for now. Okay, so you can see like in this area, right, we've lost the detail in the wing, or this area right here, we lost the detail in the head. So the process is really like, it's kind of a push and pull situation, right? So I'm going to lose something, and I'm going to bring a little bit of it back, and I'm going to lose it again and bring a little bit more of it back until I'm happy with the overall effect. I'm happy with the composition. I'm happy with the focal point, just things like that. So I might come back on a layer and just bring back some of this wing, right? If this was a real, or I might render it a little bit. If this had some rendering going on, just bring back some of these details in the back of the head, just a little bit there, so that everything is not completely lost. Some of it is, but not everything.
Amy in chat's just saying the salts and alcohol are my favorite to use, and it has nothing to do with my love of margaritas. And now I really want a cocktail.
Yeah,
right. It's warm.
Perfect. Yeah, I should have had margaritas on hand. Yeah, for this example.
Absolutely.
So next thing you want to do is pour a margarita over the paper.
Have you tried that? You've tried everything else.
I tried it with soda the other day. I had like a carbonated. It was just carbonated water. It wasn't like, it didn't have sugar in it. Yeah. And I tried it. Making a wash, because I thought maybe the bubbles would do something cool. And you could kind of see it. Like it was definitely different than just plain water. But it was really subtle. So I don't know if it was. It's probably worth further exploration.
I think so. Yeah. Especially late at night after a hot day.
Right.
With alcohol involved.
Yeah, I would say, it's fun to take a drink and then pour a little over the paper. Okay, so this is the process. I mean, this is what I'm doing. This is a really simple. The bird has no rendering. It was flat color. Like normally I would render the bird a little bit with some light and shadow. I would had the line work would probably be a little bit more cleaner. It would have some more detail to it, and then I would do all of what I just did. Does that make sense? Does the process make sense? The push and pull aspect of it, where you're adding stuff, you're taking away, things like that.
I think so. Does everyone want to say in chat if that all makes sense to them so far?
Yeah.
Makes sense to me, but I've seen you work a lot, Nathan. So.
Well, yeah, it's really fun. Like, it's not like a exact science. Like you're just going along, and what looks right to your eye. I mean, you keep things in mind, like the focal point, like composition and things like that. But this is my favorite part, because you're really beginning to add that bit of abstract, and you're trying to find the balance between realism and abstract, and it's my favorite part. So I really love to talk about it at length.
Yeah,
I'll try not to do that today.
Everyone's saying yes, it does make sense. Everyone's also talking about the tech that they use as well to interact with Photoshop. Did you actually say what you were using? I can't remember. Did you say what tech? Are you using a Wacom tablet or?
Oh, it's the monitor. I don't know what it's called. Cintiq, is that it? Cintiq?
Okay, cool.
Is that right?
I'm not sure.
It's the monitor that you can draw on.
I see.
It's one of those. Yeah. I think it's 24 inches or 20. It's not the big one. The big one's like 32, and it's the one below that. So I didn't. I
do actually have a monitor I can draw on, but I've never tried it. Maybe I should.
Yeah. It makes it more like the iPad. It adds a little bit of. I tried to use tablets in the past, but I could never.
Yeah.
I guess I look at my hand more. I was used to, and I couldn't look at the monitor and not look at my hand on the tablet thing. It wasn't a good.
No, a bit weird
combo for me. Yeah, it was weird for me. But other people use it and love it. But it's just something I never got used to. Okay, so now I'm going to move over to a much more complex example. But now we know what the process is. As I walk through the complex example, you'll be able to see where I did all of the same things that we just went over. Okay, so here we go. All right, now this is my sketch of a space girl. Okay, so I was going through Pinterest, and sometimes I do that just looking for just random inspiration of things just to sketch, or just it's a fun painting to do. And I stumbled across, let's have my reference. I found this portrait, which I thought was really cool. I liked the shine in her eyes, and I thought the way she was looking was really cool. I also liked, just so you understand what I'm looking for in a reference for something like this, this bit of lighting here, I thought was really cool. So you'll see that in my sketch, where I tried to capture that bit of lighting on her face. And I'm not going to go over rendering in detail today, but I did go over rendering in detail in the Procreate Illustration School, which is now available on Design Cuts. And I talk about rendering at length and go over how to render and what to look for in light and shadow. So that's a really good
for sure. And
class.
There's a bit of a taster session for that as well, a free taster session, isn't there, in the Learning Hub? So go check out the Learning Hub, because there's the kind of the little taster of that, or like a half an hour session where you give a taster of these things, which is really cool.
I went through in lightning speed.
Yeah. A few weeks back, you did.
I did. It was lightning fast.
Yeah.
Okay. I also found this cool space helmet, right? You know, that one caught my eye, and I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, it's real retro looking. Like nobody would wear that in space, but I just loved it. Thought it was really cool. I like sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, I'm getting space. Was it Space 1999 vibe, if that makes sense?
I've got a space 1999 comic over there on the shelf. You can't see it from here, but I love that. I love the 70s looking sci-fi. Cool. I love that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay. So you can see the reference that I used to put together this sketch. Okay. So my initial rough, I added that flat color, which is here. Okay. So this is the stage that our bird was in, right? That we just looked at. It's just, I basically took the sketch and just added in all the colors that I wanted to see. Now, this is what we will essentially be taking away from as we go, right? This is our base point. I also did a layer of a little bit of shading, right?
And right now it's looking like incredibly illustrative, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't look anything like watercolor. And to be honest, I wasn't particularly worried about this looking ultra realistic watercolor. Like I probably would not have added, or I wouldn't have been quite so detailed in the sketch. It would have been a little bit looser if I was going for a realistic watercolor look. I just wasn't worried about that for this one, even though there's some realistic watercolor elements in it that you'll see here in just a bit. But you'll also see some areas where I just went, well beyond what real watercolor would look like. I mean, this is definitely digital watercolor. Okay, so I've got a little bit of rendering, a little bit of shading. I just really added some shading here underneath the mask. And I just did that with a soft watercolor brush, just because I knew there would be some shading there, down here, right down here. Just real loose stuff. I mean, like it wasn't really anything real detailed. It was just to give me an idea of like, okay, there'll be some shadows here. And that's about as far as I went. Okay, so from this point, I just flattened it down and I began to render. Okay, now there's the light and shadow in her face, and it's beginning to look a little bit more like a painting here, but not necessarily a watercolor painting. But again, I wasn't really concerned with looking like ultra realistic watercolor for this particular piece. So, okay, so now I've got this initial render, and I'm going to begin to smudge out some of the edges, some of the areas that I know I want to be a little bit more abstract, just like we did in the bird example. So it started to look like this. So I'm taking areas and I am just taking the smudge brush, watercolor smudge brush. I knew that I wanted the hair to have some abstract elements. The hair I was thinking at the time, I'm gonna have the hair kind of flow out into like a watercolor wash, something like that. So I began to blur those areas. And then I took it further and just blurred even more. So I started to just really blur out the hair. I started to add a little bit of wash texture there, some of the helmet there, and some areas over here on her face, this edge of the hair, just going around and just blurring some of those edges. So that's my final look for the actual the painting of the girl. So I went ahead and added some washes to the background. Now these are just the wash stamps that I just put in the background behind her. But what you can see is, had I not blurred those edges, let's take a look. Had I not blurred those edges, she just kind of looks like a cutout, right? Like she's not really blended in with the background. She's just kind of like floating above it, right? It's not blended. So you can see just smudging the edges like that, it just starts to look a little bit more cohesive. Not completely, but a little bit more so than had we not done that step. All right. So if we go to start looking at the painting itself, the ways I started to add and subtract as I render out the painting. So the next step would have been some detail washes, and I'll show you what that looks like on and off. All I'm doing here is just taking some more wash stamps and just removing some more hard edges. So I'm taking colors that are already in the painting and just using some washes to blur some of those edges or lose some of those edges. So if you can see, like there's more hard edges here and some of them get taken away. So I'm in a process now of removing some of what was there, and I'll bring some of it back later. Okay, so now I want to establish a little bit of lighting. So I added an overlay wash layer, and this is just a layer with the blend mode set to overlay, and I'm using yellows and pinks. Now, there's already pink in the painting. The reason I chose yellow is because it's the complementary of purple, which is in the background. So you can see just by doing that. Now, this is just wash stamps again, like I'm just stamping these washes down. Now, if I turn it off, you can see that it adds, that overlay adds a bit of lighting. And I wanted to establish some lighting at this point because everything was very, very muted, very dark. So this starts to bring in a little bit of light and a little bit of yellow to the color scheme. Okay. Now, I love splatters. I always try to use a little bit of splatters, but in this particular piece, I thought the splatters would be great as stars. So since we're working in space here, I thought some white splatters would be fantastic to establish a little bit of stars. It's also adding some great texture to the background. Okay. And now here's an example where like you really couldn't necessarily do this with watercolor alone, like with traditional watercolor, but I just took an airbrush and added some glows to some of these stars. Like you can see that it's just a simple airbrush glow, just because I wanted some of those stars to glow. And while I was working on this, I accidentally like got a splatter over the top of her face because I tend to just put them down real quick and then erase some of the splatters that I don't want. I landed a few on her face and I thought, ooh, those will work really good as freckles. So I added some freckles. One of those happy accidents, right?
Love those, Nathan.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Happy accident. Okay, wasn't planning for freckles, but then there they are. All right. So, okay, so now I wanted to add, because the face, the portion of the glass over her face, it doesn't look, it's not there, right? It's just a line representing where the mask, the glass mask is over her face. So I wanted to add some reflections to that. So I did that on this layer here. And the way I did that was, now this is an example where I probably would do this in Photoshop and I might do it differently in Procreate. And just because, I don't know, there's just tools in Photoshop that I guess I'm just used to using, and my brain works a little differently when I'm in Procreate. But one way I did this was I used the lasso tool, right? And I would just draw a portion, and there's no feathering on the lasso tool, so it's a real sharp edge. And then I would just take like a wash and set it to white and just kind of stamp in. Oops, it's not white. Get white. And just kind of stamp in some wash, and we end up with this really hard edge, if you can see that there. Another way to do it, though, which I did for this the glass mask, was to use the gradient tool, and it's set to a radial gradient, so it's a circle, and you can just drag in to that selection and just create a bit of a sharp edge. And I did this quite a bit in the hair, which I'm about to show you. But that's just two methods that I use in Photoshop that I would probably do it a little bit differently in Procreate. For one, there's not a radial gradient tool. Just did that for the glass in the mask. And I'll show you where it's at. It's right here. And it's also right there. And there's a bit right there, just to make it look like glass, right? To give it that little bit of reflection. All right, so now, okay, now here's an example where I wanted to add some more back in. I wanted to add some detail in. I mean, like this is already looking pretty cool to me. Like there's some abstract elements going on. The focal point is obviously her face. Her face is well established, and there's some nice abstract elements going on. But I wanted to push it further with line work and further detail, again, because I wasn't really concerned at this point with things looking necessarily like real watercolor in this particular piece. So I added a ton of line work. Now, This is an example where, like, you know, we could add this line work in, and then we could smudge some of it out, or we could erase some of it out with a watercolor stamp, you know, just how to remove some of it. But I liked it. I liked the detail in her hair. I liked the way it was flowing, and it added some direction to the composition. But I'll show you what it looks like with and without. So there it is without. There it is with. So a lot of the detail went into her hair. Okay, so then I shaded the hair with the lasso tool and the gradient that I just showed you, using that exact same method. So there's some dark areas and some light areas were added to her hair. So these, I'm going to zoom in just so you can kind of see that. Like these sharper edges that do that, you know, just to kind of follow the direction of the hair. And it gave it kind of some rendering. You can see where I smudged it out a little bit, just to give a little bit of dimension to her hair. And so next up, I added went back to washes, added some highlight washes. Now this is just a layer that is just the blending mode set to normal. And I just wanted to come back in with some white and some yellow washes just to add a bit of light. And then you can also see, move this up, you can also see that it's removing things. It's making some of these things a little bit, like it's softening some of those hard edges. Right, so now, okay, so now I added a watercolor texture here, and this is like an actual watercolor texture file that comes with the master watercolor set. There's like 50 of these just watercolor wash textures that you can use, and this is a JPEG file from the set. I copied and pasted it, and I just added it into the composition, and I tilted it, and I'm going to set it to, it's set to multiply so that it's transparent. I'm going to set it to normal so you can see kind of what it's doing. It's at this angle here, and then I erased portions of it, which you can't see. Oh, there it goes. I erased some portions of it here. I didn't need, or I felt like they were distracting. And I'll set it back to multiply so you can see. Yeah, so it's not doing much, but it's just adding a little bit of that watercolor texture. Now, while I was working on this, now this is not realistic watercolor, what I'm about to show you, but it's too cool, right? I mean, like I had to add this, right? While I was working on this, the Webb Space Telescope published some pictures.
The James Webb Space Telescope, right?
Yes, they published some high-resolution pictures of space. I'm like, oh, I'm painting this space, and they just did that. I had to go get one, and I got this one, which I thought was really cool. Yeah, really, really cool.
It doesn't look real, does it?
It's it doesn't look real.
It's actually real.
It almost looks like watercolor texture, which is kind of what we're, it's what we're doing. I added it on a layer here, and it just added like I'm just going to turn it off here real quick so you can see it again. It's one of those things, like I was not planning, go to this layer. I was not planning on doing this kind of thing to her eyes, right? You can see that. I'll turn it off. I was not planning on doing that, but I just dropped this in. I was moving it around, and I'm like, oh, that's great. That looks really cool. And it's something that was just kind of another happy accident. It added this really cool lines, these lines here that are like this.
It's added so much depth, hasn't it? It looks like those are actually reflections off the helmet. Yeah, really cool. And like she's looking out into space now, and it's being reflected back off the helmet.
Yeah, and we didn't even do anything. We didn't even paint that. Like it just was a matter of adding a texture.
Very cool.
It also shifted the colors a little bit, which I like. It kind of everything went a little bit more. It leaned toward cool, which is kind of more space-like in a way.
Gone a bit Barbarella.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. Okay, so one more thing I want to show you too is I hit this stage and I began to add more line work to see if I could find some areas that I wanted to bring out. And so I created one more line work layer that I ended up getting rid of, but I kept it in here because I wanted to show you how you can maybe go a little bit too far, or you can go a step to where it's like, oh, I'm messing a little bit too much with what was there before. So I added this line work layer. Now you can see I started adding line work to the helmet and to the antenna off there to the side, and I'm gonna turn it off and on so you can see what's happening. But you can see like it kind of, in my opinion, it kind of distracts from her face, and that's not what I wanted to do. So there's a line work layer that I did, but ended up not using. Now, if I was going for ultra realistic watercolor look for this, I would probably use a paper texture, which I have right here. I also have a border, which you often see a taped border in a realistic watercolor painting. I added that in just to try it out. I added watercolor paper texture here, which adds another dimension, which I really didn't talk about in the bird example. But when you add that watercolor paper, it really does add a very realistic look to digital watercolor when you add paper textures. But for this one, again, I wasn't too concerned with that, and so I decided not to use it. I felt like it just worked better. It was a little bit cleaner, and I decided not to use paper. But I did do some final adjustments. I added a curves adjustment and a color balance, and I'll show you what that looks like. I just pushed things a little bit more blue just to give it that kind of cool temperature, that color temperature. And that was it for this one.
I love it, Nathan.
So
it's like illustration meets watercolor meets photo manipulation.
A little bit, yeah.
Really
it's a little
cool.
bit of everything. Yeah, and,
really
and
nice.
to be honest, like, you know, I probably, had I been working in Procreate, I probably wouldn't have grabbed that space texture.
Yeah,
you know, it's
and
just
that's what
something about
Photoshop really
Photoshop.
just adds that extra dimension and does come up with something that's a little bit more book cover. It's a bit more illustration, but it's a bit, you know, there's a synergy going on. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, this one, it kind of it felt a little bit more like mixed media to me than versus like a, you know, like a really going for a traditional look. And I like stuff like this. You know, I like movie poster illustration and like real mixed media type stuff. So this is really like in my wheelhouse. I really like this kind of a look, and then borrowing what I know from working with real watercolor and just adding that bit of abstract. It just gives so much depth to something like this. You know, just having that bit of mixture of edges and mixture of textures. You know, I love stuff like that.
Awesome.
So I hope that makes sense.
Nathan, that was an awesome session, and it was really interesting to see this kind of artwork from you, which I haven't before. So it's really fascinating to see that. Anybody who wants the Master Watercolor brush set, it's 20% off just for today. Down at the bottom, if you want to learn more about actually how to paint watercolor, do check out the watercolor masterclass course that we released with Nathan on Design Cuts earlier on this year. Rave reviews. It's absolutely awesome. If you want to see bits of work done by that, go to our community hub. There's loads of our community who've been pushing work out done by that and master watercolor brushes, etc. So you can actually see you know, real life designers and how they feel about these products. So there you go.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, and do share your work in the community hub as ever. Because we love to see it, and as does the rest of the community. So yeah, the community hub is just the link at the top of the Design Cuts site, top right. Awesome. Absolutely. Lovely. Thank you ever so much, Nathan. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody, too. And we will see you soon.